Okay, the best advice that I've ever been given is, again, it's a very difficult question. There's a lot of different advice that is appropriate for a lot of different situations. I think with respect to my career and how I went about being a professor, I was given a piece of advice. Actually, I talk about this in some of my presentations by Eric Carrera, who was a professor at Caltech at the time. I was a postdoc. I'd just been accepted to start my career as assistant professor at Berkeley. But just before I started, I visited Caltech to give a seminar. And while I was there, Carrera gave me this piece of advice, and it was very important to me. But the interesting part is, I've told Eric Carrera this subsequently, and he doesn't even remember giving me this advice, which is kind of interesting, because sometimes you think that just because a piece of advice is momentous to you, it doesn't mean it means anything to the person that's giving it. But the piece of advice was the following. He told me that if you go to Berkeley, or if you go to Caltech, or you go to MIT or Harvard, you'll be surrounded by very smart people. He said, you're a smart person, your students will be very smart. These are very, very capable people. So one of the things that you have to do is that you have to pick a problem to work on and make the assumption that you're going to solve it. Never worry about whether you can solve the problem or not. You just make the assumption you will, because you're surrounded by very smart people. But by doing that, he says you should go after a problem that in many cases you might not even begin to have a solution for right now, but it's a problem that you know will have a very large impact. And I think that was, as a piece of advice, was an incredibly liberating piece of advice, because it basically tells you that you can go off and work on any problem you want, you're going to solve it. So if you're going to do that, you might as well go after the biggest problem that you can imagine and the one that you think is going to have the biggest impact. So you can throw yourself at something and not worry necessarily about whether you have a solution to it yet. You just know or hope that eventually you're going to get there based upon you and the people that surround you. And that advice has always enabled me to go after what I think are the biggest problems that I perceive, as opposed to working on things which I think are easy or readily attainable, or sort of picking the lowest hanging fruit. By going after what I think are the most difficult problems, but also the problems which will have the largest impact, I think with that comes an enormous amount of satisfaction whenever you eventually do solve those problems.